billion-dollar movies. We've all seen them. Probably saw some of them with friends or family, and we probably remember a lot of them. And some are forgotten. So today I'll be talking about the top 5 most forgotten billion-dollar movies. And let me know down in the comments, what was the most forgettable billion-dollar movie that you've seen? If you even remember it. Before we get started, I'd like to give 2 honorable mentions, starting with Moana 2. Now, because this is the most recent billion-dollar movie, I don't necessarily think it's been forgotten already. But something tells me that despite how popular the first Moana is, the sequel will not have that same lasting cultural relevance. But that's more of a guess, not really reality yet. And honorable mention number 2 is Avatar. Now, a good bit of people remember this movie simply for the fact that it is the highest grossing movie of all time. But it is often considered highly peculiar for its status as the highest grossing movie because it's not as often talked about in the modern day. But come December, just wait to see how many people will remember Avatar again. These movies are essentially designed to be cultural theatrical experiences, and then they're completely forgotten after that. But given its top grossing status, as well as its relevance every time a sequel comes out, I can't say it's a top 5 most forgotten movie. With that said, don't forget to subscribe and let's get into this. Number 5, Alice in Wonderland. The remake, not the original, or the book. The most that this movie is probably remembered for is being directed by Tim Burton and being the Kickstarter to the Disney remake trend that we're still suffering to this day. But when people talk about modern remakes, they typically will talk more about ones from the past 10 years or so, such as Beauty and the Beast or The Lion King, or of course Snow White. But when it comes to Alice in Wonderland itself, most people don't really talk about it or remember it anymore. This was a movie that a lot of people didn't really know what to make of it when it first came out, as it was often viewed as somewhat disconnected from the whimsical, absurdist style of the original movie and book, and instead more of a generic chosen one archetype. And its lack of lasting relevance was further proven when a sequel came out in 2016 that I'm sure none of you have seen unless you're a YouTuber ranking the Disney remakes. Alice Through the Looking Glass was a dramatic underperformance at the box office, and it's typically classified as a full-out box office bomb, which just further demonstrates how little people remembered the first movie. I guess this movie is also remembered for the distinctive appearance and performance of Johnny Depp as the Mad Hatter, but that's still not enough to really save the overall forgotten nature of this movie. Number 4, The Fate of the Furious. Now, it can be pretty debatable at what point the Fast and Furious franchise jumped the shark, but I imagine a lot of people would say around the 6th or 7th movie, meaning that by the 8th movie, most had already considered this franchise to have gone off the rails. Or should I say, off the street. After Furious 7, the Fast and Furious franchise was essentially solidified as a globally dominant blockbuster action franchise. However, when it comes to the overall franchise, this is not one of the more often talked about movies. Given that Vin Diesel and Paul Walker were the 2 tentpoles of the franchise, a lot of fans don't really talk about this movie as much because it's the first one to not feature Paul Walker in it. This movie also lacked distinctive action and car stunt scenes that caused it to become more forgotten compared to other movies in this franchise. But in general, the Fast and the Furious franchise has 10 movies at this point, and with Fate of the Furious being the 8th entry and often considered one of the weaker entries, it's often one of the more forgotten movies in the franchise, and thus more often forgotten that it did make $1 billion. Number 3, Transformers: Age of Extinction. How do you manage to make a movie about the threat of extinction so incredibly boring? Ask Transformers 4. or Ice Age 5. This movie was notorious for having a sluggishly long runtime, and it pretty much became a pinnacle example of mindless entertainment. The plot of this movie centered around, well, does it even really matter? Age of Extinction is primarily just known for being an overabundance of explosions and spectacle to the point where it became exhausting and irritating, especially as the first 3 movies had already been heavy on that type of spectacle. And given that Age of Extinction had a notoriously tedious plot, it really didn't do much to stand out from the previous movies, and it deepened franchise fatigue, which was further demonstrated when the sequel saw nearly a 50% decline in box office return. Hey, almost like Ice Age 5. Since Age of Extinction, none of the Transformers movies have been able to come close to the box office success that the franchise once had. Additionally, the movie also replaced some of the main human characters from the first 3 movies, like taking out Shia LaBeouf and replacing him with Mark Wahlberg, and this just added to the forgettability amongst fans. Despite Age of Extinction's best efforts to be an over-the-top, chaotic mess of CGI action, it is generally quite discarded from the public memory of billion-dollar blockbusters. Number 2, Jurassic World Dominion.
Ellie Sattler.
Alan Grant.
This could practically be interchangeable with Fallen Kingdom, but Dominion is slightly more forgotten overall in the general public discourse. At its peak, Fallen Kingdom was actually within the top 15 highest grossing movies of all time, while Dominion only passed $1 billion by the skin of its teeth. Despite Dominion's desperate attempts to utilize nostalgia bait, it still couldn't reel in enough engagement to prevent it from becoming entirely forgotten upon exiting theaters. This movie simply had one of the most ludicrous plots in the entire Jurassic Park franchise. For a franchise globally revered for its dinosaurs, as well as the endless possibility of directions that could be taken after Fallen Kingdom's cliffhanger of releasing dinosaurs into the regular world, Dominion decides to focus its big finale plot on locusts. Locusts. Like, why? And the movie desperately tries to save itself by bringing back the main trio from the original movie. Oh, and Dodgson. Can't forget Dodgson.
Dodgson, we've got Dodgson here!
This movie was still very poorly received overall. Now, much of the general public does like this movie more than Fallen Kingdom, primarily because of nostalgia. But Dominion didn't have the same degree of anticipation as Fallen Kingdom, and it was only released a few years after the pandemic, where movies were just not as dominant and relevant to the public as they were before the pandemic. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Most people typically like Rise of Skywalker slightly more than Last Jedi, but Last Jedi is typically more remembered because of how divisive it was, whereas Rise of Skywalker was just an absolute chaotic mess released amidst one of the most globally dominant box office years of all time. Thus, Rise of Skywalker got completely overshadowed by the better and more profitable blockbusters from 2019. And similarly, Jurassic World Dominion is often more forgotten as it was released after the peak engagement of blockbuster movies, and it simply had an extremely underwhelming and pathetic plot to close out the Jurassic World trilogy. And no, Jurassic World Rebirth is not changing that at all. And number 1, Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides.
Better off you just... Stay out of it.
You'll notice that most of the movies on this list were late entries into established franchises. You'll also notice that the direct sequels after these movies noticeably declined in box office return. We'll see if Jurassic World Rebirth can keep that streak going. Pirates of the Caribbean was initially designed to be a trilogy, But it was such a financially successful trilogy that we all know what Disney has to do when that happens. So in 2011, Pirates of the Caribbean 4 was released on Stranger Tides. Why?
Money!
It was essentially a soft reboot that changed numerous aspects of the original trilogy style and replaced those aspects with sillier, campier, and less charming features, such as removing the supporting cast from the movie, making Jack Sparrow significantly less charming and charismatic, and utilizing a plot that lacked the large-scale adventure of the plots in the original trilogy. So despite the anticipation of the general public to see Pirates of the Caribbean on the big screen again, it was largely considered underwhelming and entirely unnecessary to the franchise, which ultimately caused it to become highly forgotten in the current day. Let me know how many of these 5 movies that you've seen. Make sure to subscribe and check out some of my other videos like my rankings of the highest and lowest rated movies from every animation studio. Thank you for watching and I will catch you in the next video.